There is a quiet power in the way you choose to perceive your life. Not in what happens to you, but in the meaning you give to what happens. Most people walk through the world as if they are at the mercy of chance, reacting, shrinking, waiting. But there is another way to live, a deeper, more deliberate way. To act as if everything always works out is not denial. It is not blindness to pain, loss, or uncertainty. It is a psychological stance. A decision to trust that even chaos carries a hidden order, that even your setbacks are shaping something within you that could not be formed any other way. Within you exists both fear and possibility. Fear speaks first. It tells you to hesitate, to doubt, to expect failure. But there is another voice, quieter yet infinitely wiser, that whispers, continue. Acting as if everything works out means choosing to follow that voice, even when logic resists, even when evidence is incomplete. What happens when you adopt this attitude? You begin to move differently. Your steps carry less hesitation. Your decisions become less burdened by imagined outcomes. You are no longer paralyzed by the question, what if it goes wrong? Instead, you are guided by a deeper knowing. Even if it does, it will lead me somewhere I need to go. This shift transforms your inner world. Anxiety begins to loosen its grip, because anxiety feeds on uncertainty. But when you assume that all paths, even the difficult ones, are ultimately meaningful, uncertainty loses its power over you. Life is not asking you to predict the future. It is asking you to participate in it. When you act as if everything works out, you align yourself with growth. You stop resisting experience and start integrating it. Every failure becomes instruction. Every rejection becomes redirection. Every delay becomes preparation. But this way of living demands courage, because to trust the unfolding of your life means you must release control, at least the illusion of it. And the ego resists this. It wants guarantees, outcomes, security, yet true transformation begins where certainty ends. There is something profound that happens when you surrender to this principle. You begin to notice that things actually do start working out. Not always in the way you expected, but in ways that are strangely precise, almost as if life is responding to your internal state. This is not magic. It is alignment. When your inner world is no longer divided by fear and resistance, your outer world begins to reflect that coherence. Opportunities appear where you once saw obstacles. People respond differently to your energy. Even your setbacks begin to feel purposeful rather than random. To act as if everything always works out is to live with quiet confidence in the unseen architecture of your life. It is to trust that there is meaning beneath the surface, even when you cannot yet perceive it. And perhaps the greatest transformation is this. You stop waiting for life to reassure you, and instead you become the one who reassures yourself. So walk forward as if the path is already unfolding in your favor. Speak as if your voice matters. Choose as if your decisions are guiding you somewhere meaningful. Because whether you realize it or not, the story of your life is not written by circumstances alone. It is shaped by the way you meet them. And when you meet life with the assumption that everything works out, you begin to live not in fear of what might happen, but in quiet trust of what is becoming. Trust the hidden order within chaos is not an idea the mind accepts easily. The surface of life appears fragmented, unpredictable, often even cruel. Events seem disconnected, accidents seem meaningless, and suffering feels unjustified. Yet beneath this apparent disorder, there exists a deeper pattern, one that is not immediately visible to the rational mind, but reveals itself over time to those who are willing to observe without resistance. Chaos, as it is commonly perceived, is not the absence of order but the presence of an order too complex to be understood at first glance. The mind seeks linearity, clear cause and effect, predictable outcomes. But life does not unfold in straight lines. It moves in cycles, in contradictions, in paradoxes. What appears as a breakdown may in fact be a necessary disintegration of something that can no longer support your growth. What feels like loss may be the removal of illusions that once kept you confined. Within the psyche, this principle operates constantly. There are moments when your inner world feels stable, coherent, and aligned. And then there are moments when everything seems to collapse. Beliefs shatter, identity becomes uncertain, emotions surge without warning. These moments of inner chaos are not signs of failure. They are signs that something deeper is reorganizing itself. The structures that once defined you are being challenged so that something more authentic can emerge. To trust this process requires a shift in perception. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" one begins to ask, "What is this trying to reveal?" This subtle change transforms chaos from an enemy into a teacher. It invites you to engage with your experiences rather than resist them. And in that engagement, meaning begins to take shape. There is a tendency to cling to control when faced with uncertainty. The ego fears dissolution, and chaos feels like a threat to its stability. It attempts to impose order prematurely to force clarity where none yet exists, but true order cannot be forced. It must emerge. Just as nature moves through storms to restore balance, the psyche moves through confusion to reach a deeper coherence. Consider how often clarity in your life has come not during moments of certainty, but after periods of confusion. It is in the breakdown that insight is born. When familiar patterns no longer function, the mind is compelled to expand. New perspectives arise, hidden aspects of the self come into awareness, and a more integrated understanding begins to form. This hidden order does not guarantee comfort. In fact, it often disrupts comfort in order to create growth. It leads you into situations that challenge your assumptions, confront your fears, and expose your limitations. Yet within these challenges lies the precise condition needed for transformation. Without them, development would remain superficial, confined to what is already known and safe. To live with trust in this unseen order is to develop patience with the process of becoming. It is to recognize that not everything needs to be understood immediately. Some experiences must be lived through before their meaning can be grasped. This requires a tolerance for ambiguity, a willingness to remain present even when answers are not available. There is also a deeper intelligence at work, one that does not operate through conscious planning alone. It reveals itself through intuition, through synchronicities, through moments that feel significant without clear explanation. These are glimpses of the underlying pattern, indications that life is not as random as it appears. When you begin to notice these moments, a sense of connection emerges. You start to feel that you are participating in something larger than your immediate perception. Trusting the hidden order does not mean passivity. It does not mean surrendering responsibility or avoiding action. Rather, it means acting without the constant need to control outcomes. It is a form of engagement that is both active and receptive, moving forward while remaining open to the unexpected. In this way, chaos becomes less threatening. It is no longer something to escape, but something to move through with awareness. Each disruption is seen as part of a larger unfolding. Each uncertainty is a space where new possibilities can arise. Over time, this perspective cultivates a quiet resilience, an inner steadiness that is not dependent on external conditions. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, what once felt like disorder begins to reveal its structure. Patterns emerge, connections become visible, and experiences that once seemed isolated are understood as part of a coherent whole. To choose faith over fear in every decision is to stand at the threshold of two opposing forces within the psyche and consciously decide which one will guide your life. Fear is immediate, instinctive, and persuasive. It speaks in urgency and doubt, in imagined consequences that have not yet occurred. It convinces you to retreat, to delay, to protect yourself from outcomes that exist only in projection. Faith, in contrast, is quieter. It does not argue with the same intensity. It does not overwhelm with scenarios. It simply invites movement even when certainty is absent. Every decision you make is shaped by one of these forces. Often this happens unconsciously. You hesitate without fully realizing why. You reject opportunities without exploring them. You remain in situations that no longer serve you because the unknown feels more threatening than the familiar discomfort. Fear thrives in this space. It feeds on uncertainty and transforms it into paralysis. To choose faith is not to eliminate fear. Fear does not disappear simply because you decide against it. It remains present, offering its warnings, its cautious narratives, its protective instincts. But faith changes your relationship to it. Instead of obeying fear, you observe it. You recognize its voice without allowing it to dictate your actions. This distinction is subtle, yet it is the foundation of inner freedom. Faith, in this sense, is not blind belief. It is not a refusal to acknowledge risk or difficulty. It is a deeper orientation toward life, an assumption that movement, even uncertain movement, is more aligned with growth than stagnation. It is the willingness to act without having complete evidence, to step forward without guarantees, to trust that clarity will emerge through action rather than before it. When you choose faith, your decisions begin to shift. You start to ask different questions. Instead of asking, "What if this goes wrong?" you begin to consider, "What if this leads me somewhere necessary?" This does not remove the possibility of failure, but it reframes it. Failure is no longer something to avoid at all costs. It becomes part of the process through which understanding is gained. Fear seeks to preserve the current structure of your identity. It resists change because change introduces instability, but growth requires instability. It requires the willingness to move beyond what is known, to encounter parts of yourself and the world that have not yet been integrated. Faith allows this movement. It supports the expansion of your perspective, even when that expansion is uncomfortable. There is also a physical dimension to this choice. Fear contracts the body. It creates tension, restricts breathing, narrows focus. It prepares you to defend, to withdraw, to survive. Faith, on the other hand, creates a sense of openness. The body becomes less rigid, the mind less confined. There is space for possibility, for creativity, for response rather than reaction. Over time, consistently choosing faith alters your internal landscape. You begin to build trust in your ability to navigate uncertainty. Decisions that once felt overwhelming become manageable, not because the stakes have changed, but because your relationship to them has changed. You are no longer seeking perfect conditions before acting. You are willing to engage with imperfect ones. This does not mean that every choice will lead to the outcome you initially desire. There will be missteps, misjudgments, and unforeseen consequences. But even these become integrated into your development. They provide information, refine your awareness, and contribute to a deeper understanding of yourself and your direction. Fear often disguises itself as logic. It presents its arguments as rational, as careful, as responsible, and sometimes caution is necessary. But there is a difference between thoughtful consideration and avoidance. Faith requires discernment, the ability to recognize when fear is serving a protective function and when it is limiting your potential. Choosing faith repeatedly creates momentum. Each decision reinforces the next. The more you act despite fear, the less authority fear holds over you. It does not vanish, but it loses its dominance. You begin to experience yourself as someone who can move forward regardless of internal resistance. There is also an element of surrender in this process. Not a passive surrender, but an acceptance that you cannot control every variable. You can prepare, you can reflect, you can choose, but you cannot predict with absolute certainty. Faith allows you to act within this limitation without becoming immobilized by it. In this way, decision-making becomes less about avoiding negative outcomes and more about aligning with a deeper sense of direction. You begin to trust not only the process of life, but your place within it. Each choice becomes an expression of that trust, a movement towards something that cannot always be fully articulated but is nonetheless felt. To see every setback as purposeful transformation requires a radical shift in how you interpret experience. The ordinary tendency is to label events as either success or failure, progress or regression, gain or loss. These categories feel immediate and convincing, yet they often conceal a deeper process unfolding beneath the surface. What appears to be a setback is rarely a final state. It is a moment within a larger movement, one that cannot be fully understood while you are still inside it. A setback disrupts expectation. It interrupts the narrative you had constructed about how things should unfold. This disruption creates tension within the psyche because the mind seeks continuity and predictability. When reality diverges from expectation, it feels as though something has gone wrong. Yet this very interruption is often the point at which transformation begins. Without it, you would continue along familiar paths, repeating established patterns without question. There is a hidden intelligence within these disruptions. They reveal the limits of your current perspective. They expose assumptions that were previously invisible. They confront you with aspects of yourself that remain underdeveloped or unexamined. In this sense, a setback is not merely an external event. It is an encounter with the boundaries of who you have been. The initial response to a setback is often resistance. There is an urge to restore what was lost, to return to a previous state of stability. This is understandable, yet it can prevent you from engaging with the deeper meaning of the experience. Transformation requires that you move through the discomfort rather than around it. It asks you to remain present with uncertainty, to tolerate the absence of immediate resolution. Within this process, something begins to shift. The identity that was once tied to certain outcomes starts to loosen. You begin to see that who you are cannot be reduced to a single success or failure. This realization creates space for a more flexible and integrated sense of self. You are no longer confined to the roles or expectations that once defined you. A setback also alters your relationship with control. It reveals the extent to which outcomes are influenced by factors beyond your immediate grasp. This can feel destabilizing, but it also invites a different kind of engagement with life, one that is less rigid, more adaptive. You begin to focus not only on results, but on how you respond to what occurs. This shift transforms the locus of control from external circumstances to internal orientation. There is often a period of ambiguity that follows a setback. Meaning is not immediately apparent. The experience may feel incomplete, unresolved. This ambiguity is not a void. It is a space of potential. It allows for the reorganization of perception, the emergence of new insights, the gradual integration of what has been encountered. Rushing to define the experience too quickly can limit this process. As time passes, patterns begin to emerge. You may notice that what initially felt like an obstacle redirected you towards something more aligned with your deeper values. You may recognize that certain losses created the conditions necessary for growth that would not have occurred otherwise. These realizations are not always immediate, but they accumulate, gradually reshaping your understanding of how life unfolds. To see setbacks as purposeful is not to romanticize difficulty or deny the reality of pain. The emotional impact of loss, failure, or disappointment is real and must be acknowledged. Transformation does not occur by bypassing these feelings, but by engaging with them consciously. In doing so, the experience becomes integrated rather than suppressed. There is also a strengthening that occurs through this process. Each time you move through a setback, you develop a deeper resilience. Not a rigid toughness, but a capacity to remain grounded in the face of change. You begin to trust that you can navigate uncertainty, that you can endure disruption without losing your sense of direction. This perspective changes how you approach future challenges. Instead of viewing them solely as threats, you begin to recognize them as opportunities for further development. This does not eliminate difficulty, but it alters your orientation toward it. You are less likely to be overwhelmed, more willing to engage, more open to what the experience might reveal. In this way, setbacks become part of an ongoing process of transformation. They are not isolated events, but integral components of growth. Each one contributes to the unfolding of a more complex, more aware, more integrated version of yourself.